great professor. I loved her. She was
okay, if I could have everybody's attention.
And they're like, okay.
Does everybody have coffee and water and cookies? We'll get started. All right. Thanks very much for coming. This is I'm Josh Rovner. For those of you who I'm meeting for the first time, thank you very much for coming. Welcome to the Tower Center. This is our monthly seminar series. We try to do one a month on Wednesday afternoons. And it's a great pleasure to welcome Hiroki Takeuchi to kick off this fall's monthly seminar series. This is the third year of this series. It's been a huge success. We've had tons of different speakers on a whole range of different topics, and we're really excited for today's talk as well. For those of you who don't know Professor Takeuchi, he's a professor of political science here at SMU. He's also director of the Sun and Star program here at the Tower Center. His whole bio is on the card in front of you. And today he's going to speak about his fabulous new book, Tax Reform in Rural China. The title may make it sound as if this is a somewhat narrow topic, tax reform, rural China. But having read the book with care, I can tell you this is not a narrow topic, because the implications of Professor Takeuchi's work are profound, not just for Chinese politics, but potentially even for regional politics. One other thing before we get going, I'd like you to take a look at the information cards in front of you. It has a list of some upcoming events here at the Tower Center. Please do take a look at that, and if you haven't been on our website, please go on. We've got full details about all of our programming this fall, as well as a lot of the exciting other programs that we're doing here at the Tower Center. So with that, I will hand over the floor to Professor Takeuchi.
All right. Thank you, Professor Rovner, for kind introduction. Since he arrived at SMU, we have been not just colleagues, but also my good friends. And so yesterday, I attended the talk by Ambassador Bob Jordan about the Middle East, and then he started talking about this is a timely topic because King Salman was just in Washington, D.C. End of this month, President Xi Jinping of China will be in Washington, D.C. And the one argument that I would make is this is actually what Mr. Xi is primarily concerned with when he makes a decision. So he has to make a decision about the U.S.-China relationship, but at the same time, when he makes a decision of U.S.-China relationship, he has to be concerned with what's going on in domestic politics of China, especially in rural China. So rural China is one of the major concerns that President Xi has. So this is so I wrote this book based on my field research, mainly conducted in 2004-2005. So now it's like 10 years ago. Fortunately for my research perspective, this problem still has continued, and then it is unfortunate for the reality of the Chinese politics, because this was a serious problem 10 years ago, and then now it's still a serious problem. So this is this is a book, and then so the cover, the picture of the cover is actually the picture that I took in one of the rural villages I conducted my field research. And so this is like, you can see this is the road is not paved, right? And then here is this is like something that the farmers dig by themselves. So the village government does not provide irrigation canal. So the farmers, they themselves made the irrigation canal. Of course, irrigation path, and then of course, this is illegal, but they are desperate. So they need water, and then people start putting, throwing away some waste, garbage, here and there. So this is actually not the unusual situation in the rural areas. So the point here is the local government in China does not provide public goods. So public goods such as irrigation canals, irrigation paths, the paving the roads, building schools, etc., etc. So this is the problem of the education in China. So this you can easily see. This is not an unusual situation either. Right? So this is like a wooden, very old table, and then student is studying there. So it's like here, right, it says like one day, like in a village, the English teacher came, and then like she taught us one sentence of English, that is, I want to go to school. So this is actually another serious problem. So the question is, why like local governments who should provide public goods do not provide public goods, right? And then people are dissatisfied with it. The shortest answer is there's no money. So my question is, well, why they do not have money? And then from the central government's perspective, well, central government should know what would happen if certain policy is implemented. Then that should lead to the lack of the budget for the local government. But even though, however, still the local government, central government implements certain policies. So the first I talk about why this problem happened. So,
Hiroki, sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, the picture you had before,
yes.
Where is that from? That's what I see.
This is actually this is actually a website, and then I'm not sure where exactly this is from, but at the same time, this is actually what also government.
So it's a government website.
Yeah. So the government advertising the problem. Well, one thing I might say on this is government is very good at, the Chinese government is very good at advertising the problem. But if you think about a few steps ahead, then you may think that why the government has not solved that problem, or why government has has allowed the problem to happen, right? Because the central government may have an ability to solve the problem of compulsory education, for example, right? So this is the problem of the fiscal situation in China. So China is big. My office mate, when I was in the Chinese Academy of Social Science, was a very nice person. He's an economist. And but he has a habit of saying that he says that he has a habit of saying China is big. Okay. So when every time I came back from my field research in the rural areas and came back to Beijing, and then I talked with him, and then I talked about I observed this, and then this is a problem, and then it needs a solution, etc., etc. And then he says, yeah, because China is big. And then that explains quite a bit. Okay, so that captures the reality. So one kind of implication that China is big is, well, there are multi-levels of the local governments. Okay, so China basically has the 5 levels of the government, starting with the central government, and then province, municipality, county, township. And then the village level is not the official government, but everybody believes that the village level is also a government. So the budget, so the revenue that the government at any level is collected should be shared by the various levels of government. So this is actually the shares of the central government versus local governments. So central government expenditures and local central government's revenue, and then this is totally zero-sum game, which means so the increase of the central government's share means decrease of the local government's share. Okay, so something happened in 1994. Okay, something happened in 1994, and then central government's share of the revenue increased. Okay, which means local government's share of the revenue decreased. Okay, and then, but at the expenditure side, central government's share in the expenditure keeps decreasing, okay, consistently. So what happened in 1994 is so-called 1994 tax reform or tax sharing system or tax division system. And so basically, it increased the central share of the fiscal revenue. And then it's totally zero-sum interaction. So that it caused the local fiscal shortage. And then in China has two kinds of the revenue. One is called within budget fund. So and then here like a tax goes to within budget fund called WBF. However, each government has another revenue called extra budgetary revenue, so EBR. So because of the fiscal shortage at the local government now has to rely more on EBR. And then EBR comes from various sources, and then it is quite ad hoc. By the way, it's not necessarily illegal. Okay, so people are angry with it, and then many people say, "Oh, that's illegal," but it's actually not necessarily illegal. And then so that's actually the result of the 1994 tax reform. So in order to collect EBR, local government basically increased the financial burdens on farmers. So it doesn't necessarily increase the tax. Actually, they decrease the tax, but they increased another source of budget called EBR, and that is called fees. So the China's tax problem is actually called 税费改革, meaning so the tax reform means tax and fee reform. So and then the fee is the kind of cause of the anger of the farmers. So here is the EDL share in the local government's revenue. And then when you look at the Chinese government statistics, you have to be careful because they constantly change the definition. So they constantly change the definition of what is included in the EDR vis-a-vis WBF. So here it happens in 1993 and it happened in 1997 again. So you can see that in 1994 there is a big jump here. Okay, and then as I'm going to say later, central government noticed that the people were angry with EDR, so fees that are for EDR. Therefore, they basically abolished the fees, and then they kind of prohibited the local government from collecting fees later. So that started in 2000. So since 2000, basically the EDL share goes down again. Okay, so that's the basic picture. So in 1994, local governments lost the formal revenue sources, and then in 2000, which I'm going to talk about, the local government now lost informal revenue source. So in 2000, 2000 to 2002, so it's based on so in 2002 is the reform started nationally, but in 2000, some provinces started the reform called tax for fee reform, and then you are from Anhui, right? Yeah. So Anhui province is the first province that was that implemented the tax for fee reform, so the idea was there are two kinds of the revenue sources for the local government. One is tax, the other is fees. And then tax is basically that is based on the laws, and the laws are legislated and implemented by the central government. In the meantime, fees that could be legislated and implemented by the local government. So fees are increased after 1994. Therefore, farmers are angry with the fees. So the central government's measure, well, let's abolish the fee. Okay. So in the tax for fee reform, central government stipulated that all the fees must be integrated into agricultural tax. And the integrated agricultural tax the tax rate must be capped at 8.4%. Okay, so the first thing, the fees are integrated into the agricultural tax, and then the new agricultural tax must be up to 8.4%. And then third, you have to reduce that new integrated agricultural tax every year. And the basic idea was you have to reduce 1 percentage point every year. And then the central government's idea is it would be nice if the agricultural tax becomes 0 by 2008, and then we will have oriented. So that was the original idea. Surprisingly, it worked. Agricultural tax actually was abolished. Prime Minister Wen Jiabao declared that in 2006, actually now agricultural tax was abolished. Okay, so the local governments responded to the central government's policy. So agricultural tax was abolished, and then basically the financial burden on the peasants, the farmers, now significantly reduced. So since 2003, so there is a data about 2003-2004, only 2% of the protests in the rural areas are concerned with tax. Well, sounds like good news, right? Well, as other issues in China, if you hear one good news, then that leads to bad news. Or another problem. So as a result of the reforms, so tax protests decreased, right? Second, well, you can easily imagine that now local governments lost the revenue source of the agricultural tax and also fees. Well, where is the revenue source, right? So this is here. My story basically is focusing on agricultural areas. So some of the rural areas are now industrialized, and then they have a rural industry, and the rural industry is kind of semi-privatized or semi-publicly owned. So the local governments got the kind of direct revenue from the rural industry. So so-called the township and township and village enterprises. So point here is so this is a story of the village or a township, the locality that has to rely on agriculture, and then now you cannot tax on the agriculture, right? So now here is a local fiscal crisis, and a few anecdotes I would like to introduce because I love it. So well, so there are some cases of corruption. Okay, there are some cases of corruption, and one county in Jilin province. So the local government, county government, applied 300,000 yuan. It's about $20,000 US dollars, and so county government applied 300,000 yuan for building a new building of the middle school. Okay, and then it turned out to be the local government, the county government, having a luxurious sedan, and it happens to cost 300,000 yuan. And then $20,000 sounds right? This didn't become a big problem because actually local government did not have to build a new building because now China is basically a one-child policy. So the number of the children go down, so you don't need to build a new building. So no new building in the middle school, and then just a new luxurious sedan. Well, that's corruption. So that there is cases of corruption cases that are kind of typical pure corruption case. However, my argument here is that kind of seemingly corruption cases are basically institutionalized. And then the point here is that without seemingly or strictly saying corruption cases, local governments cannot be operated. So that's actually my argument here. So some other examples. So in the Longpole Township in Jiangxi province, so the government decided to construct a new office building, And at the same time, government send a funding request to the county government, so the township government, and one step above is the county government. So the subsidies of 900,000 yuan to level farmland. Okay, so the item is leveling the farmland. And so they follow the law, the regulation of the application of the subsidies. That is, in order to level farmland, you need to apply 3,000 yuan per mu. So the mu is the unit of land. However, everybody knows that you only need 1,000 yuan per mu. Okay, so they applied 900,000 yuan to level farmland, and then it was approved, and then 900,000 yuan was came subsidized to the township government. They used 300,000 yuan for leveling farmland, and then the other 600,000 yuan for building a new government building. Well, here, point is, they follow the rule of the applying subsidies, right? So here, my point is, the misappropriation of the fiscal transfer is institutionalized. They know that county government knows that 2/3 of the subsidies will be used for administrative costs, and then they know that otherwise the township government cannot operate. Another example that's actually even more creative. In another township, I spent quite a bit of time in Jiangxi province. So I met with the governor of the township, and he gave me the report of his speech in the People's Congress. And then, so his report includes the data of the fiscal situation. And then it says it reported the corporate tax of 3.3 million yuan last year. And then I stayed there for a few weeks, and then I cannot find any single corporations. So no corporations, but corporate tax of 3.3 million yuan. Sounds great, right? So where does it come from? So I found one interesting official who is very talented, and then he knows that he will not be fired because he is kind of capable. So he told me the real story, and then that is a story of buying taxis. And the buying taxis, it's a little bit like I need to spend time to figure out what's going on. So that township, basically, more than 1.2 million yuan came from buying taxis. So what's that? So officials used their personal connection and to locate the enterprises in another township that agreed to pay their corporate tax in this township. So this is the township that I did the field research is a kind of remote, typical agricultural township. But there are other townships that are technically rural areas, but have more industrialized. And then they pick up some of the enterprises, and then if they agree with the paying corporate tax in rural township, then they will enjoy a 30% discount. And the local official of that industrialized township will also enjoy some kickback. It cost 400,000 yuan, but they fundraised 1.2 million yuan as a corporate tax. So as a total of the nation, it's a bad thing. It's a lower tax collection, but for that township, it worked very well. So the one thing that I would like you to keep in mind is one reason why the local officials are so desperate to raise the revenue is the law says you have to make ends meet every year. So at every level, the Chinese local government has to make ends meet. And then if you do not do that, China is authoritarian system, not democracy. So all the officials the promotion, demotion are at the hands of the higher authority. Okay, so then there will be they may have a problem in the personnel system. So after 2000, problem is the local governments lost the revenue sources, either taxes or fees. So they have to find some other way to raise the revenue. So this is actually another way of raising revenue, that is selling land. China's rural areas, like the land rights, ownership rights, is quite chaotic. And then basic idea is farmers believe that their land is their own land. Law says land is owned by collectives. So question is, farmers believe that they are collectives. But at the same time, the officials believe that means that the collectives means government, the village government. So officials believe that they can sell the land owned by collective, which means village government. So this is a illegally used land area in 2000-2002. And by the way, this is actually, you can get this data from official statistics. So probably this is underestimated. But point here is illegally used land area in 2000 is like this. And then in 2002 is like this. So which means what I want you to pay attention to is originally more land is used illegally by the government in 2000, and in 2002 more land is used illegally by enterprises. So which means that an illegally used land is transferred from the government to the enterprise between 2000 and 2002. So and then who is doing what? So 90% of the land was expropriated by the government, and especially the lower government, right? And then it is occupied, or which means it is used by enterprises. Okay. So the point here is land is expropriated by the township, the county, township, or village government. And then it is kind of sold to the enterprises. That's what's going on. Well, so it will help the budget of the county, township, and village government, which has lost the revenue source. Well, the problem is you cannot keep selling the land because land is finite, right? So that's actually the problem that happened after that. So I'd like to now talk about. People are now really angry with the government, or frustrated. So, interesting thing is the Chinese central government gave some ways, some venues to express their dissatisfaction. So the central government is aware of how angry people are, how dissatisfied people are. So central government superficially tells them that, well, you can express your dissatisfaction. So they allow people to petition, to write a petition about the local government, and then send a petition to higher authority. Okay. So the point here is if you are dissatisfied with township government, you can write a petition to the county government. If you have a dissatisfaction to the county government, you can write a petition to the municipal government. And you can easily see that there's no way to write a petition about central government, right? So there's no government above it. Central government now allows the people to sue the local government. Does not allow to sue the central government, but to sue the local government. At the village level, they introduced elections. And then this actually is working. Okay, at least the elections took place in almost all the villages. Question is, are they effective as a way of political participation? So the people are effectively participating in decision-making process of China. Second, are they harbinger to democracy? Because this is seemingly is more democratic, right? Well, my answer is no. This is the shortest answer. But interesting thing of the studying authoritarian politics is actually almost all the authoritarian regimes have some seemingly democratic institutions, right? And then originally we thought that it's a kind of harbinger to democracy, and then an authoritarian regime that eventually goes to democracy. Well, in 2003, Levesque Way, later he wrote a book, and then they said in the article says that kind of thing happened very rarely. Okay, so it's rarely transitional forms of democracy. And then Barbara Geddes, who knows a lot about the authoritarian regime in Latin America in the 70s, she says basically that if the authoritarian regime has democratic institution, that is a well-institutionalized governance by authoritarian regime. And this is, I will not go over like more detailed stuff, but the series of the literatures written by political scientists working on various authoritarian regimes say that, well, basically democratic institution or seemingly democratic institution in authoritarian regime strengthens authoritarian regimes, and then that helps the resilience of authoritarian regime instead of promoting democratization. So, democratic institutions in China's authoritarian regime. So China is not an exception. So the Chinese Communist Party has established the seemingly democratic institutions that I just introduced. And then the purpose is it strengthens its authoritarian regime and it makes China's one-party rule resilient. So, this again the question. So let's go over each institution. So are petitions effective? Well, here's the puzzle. So only 0.2% of the problem petitions were resolved in the petition process in 2003. Well, it's authoritarian regime, so why does the government cares about it? So, sure. Puzzle is here. The number of petitions and petitioners actually increased in the same year when only 0.2% of the problems petitioned were resolved via petition system. Okay? So question is, why do people petition? Local courts? Well, here is an answer to my question in the interview. So county party secretary in Hunan province says, a county judge would not receive his salary from the local government the following month if he were to convict the local government. Okay, well, defendant is responsible for paying for the judge. Then this would happen, right? So again, it's authoritarian regime. So why it's puzzling? Well, actually, 63% of petitioners first attempted to solve the problem through the court system. So if it is not effective, why people still use it? Right? The two things. Here's an argument. So the two things. Number one is actually. So here's an observation. So farmers, when they're dissatisfied, when they protest, they eventually go to the local government that they are targeting. So if they are dissatisfied with the township government, they eventually go to the township government and then told them their dissatisfaction directly, and called the tactical escalation, which is a term by Kevin O'Brien and Lianjian Li, those who are working on this issue for a long time. So the eventual outcome is tactical escalation. But think about what would strengthen your position when you face the targeted local government officials. Well, it might help if you have legitimacy. And then the process of court and petition system will strengthen your legitimacy. I have tried all the legitimate legitimate institutions that was set by central government. Okay, what we are doing is legal, but problem was not solved. Therefore, I'm here. Okay, right. So the legitimacy building is one thing. Another thing is solving corrective action problem. That is, when you have a dissatisfaction with something, well, your neighbor may or may not share your dissatisfaction, right? So by writing a petition, you may see whether other people also share the same dissatisfaction, right? So then so I wrote this petition, and how do you think? Oh, I'm also dissatisfied with that. So then you can find a colleague, and then you will have more colleagues when you go to protest. And when you face the local government officials, right? So this is actually basically. So my argument here is the petition system and the local courts. They are used because the people are building legitimacy, number one, and then also solving the corrective action problem. village election. American starters, Western starters, really like the village elections because this is Tocqueville. And then he said, grassroots elections deserve principal credit for the effective democratic government of America. This is what Tocqueville says, right? So it's a grassroots democracy. And this is what I heard in China's rural villages. So the vice party secretary of the town in Hunan province, who is in charge of monitoring and managing and regulating the village election. So candidates in the village elections in our town never carry on a campaign. I asked him, so what kind of campaign was going on in your villages? So never campaign. So we don't have a problem of buying votes. No campaign, no corruption. So I'm doing very well, right? So he was so proud of it, right? It's puzzling. Usually, campaigning is the core of the electoral system, right? Or democracy. This is another statement. So so the village chief who was elected in the last election. So I asked him, what was your strategy in the last village election? Well, he said, I did nothing during the last election because I felt I did not have to be village chief, and because I already was the village party secretary, but villagers nominated me, and then I was elected. Okay. So, question. So a few things that I would like you to, a few institutions that become the basis of these stories. So one is, in institutional setting, so in China's village, there are two powerful people. One is the party secretary, and the other is the village chief. And the village chief is elected popularly, but the party secretary is not. And which one is more powerful? Of course, party secretary. Right? So I was in the Chinese villages, and then when I interviewed basically, I tried to interview village chief and village party secretary separately. Some cases, one person serves for both positions. So I tried to interview them separately, but in 6 cases, I had to interview them together. 5 of those 6 cases, basically, all the questions are answered by village party secretary, and then village chief was just nodding, one case, which was exception, it's not because village party village chief is incompetent, but because the village party secretary was drunk when I arrived there. Okay. So one is the problem of the non-elected candidates. Another is, which I want to focus on, is the size of the electorate. Basically, it's about population is about between 300 and 5,000. 5,000 sounds like very big, but when I talked with the villagers, they say, actually, basically, I know everybody because we grow up in this village. Very rarely, people come outside to the village. People go outside, but the people do not come into the village. So, idea is this is an election where everybody knows each other. Idea is this is an election where the candidate knows every voter. Okay. So number one, so implication of that, the small size electorate is number one. Corruption is very easy, right? So you have to bribe much fewer people, and then you know what each voter wants. But second, actually, not all the elections are corrupt, and then there are some cases. There are quite a few cases called what I call consensual elections. And then consensual elections is where villagers agree with one candidate, and he's a good candidate or she's a good candidate. So let's vote for him or her. And then the candidate is elected with the kind of overwhelming majority, like 70%, 80%. And usually we think that, so that looks like a typical dictatorial election. But no, it's actually those the candidates who were elected with a big margin tends to be a good governor. And then because villagers had agreed that he or she is a good governor. So small size electorate causes basically the electoral competition and accountability. This is like a familiar mechanism that do not work. Instead, if the electorate is small, then the candidate does not have an incentive to organize a kind of party-like organization. So what CCP is really worried about is some like a group of the people who organize, and then they protest, or they raise a demand against the central government, against the Chinese Communist Party. And then if you introduce electoral institution, you may imagine that party will be formed, but Chinese Communist government, Chinese Communist Party introduces the electoral institution in a way that it will not lead to form a political party. So the prediction of that argument is probably there will be more elections at the grassroots level, but not spreading to the higher levels. And that's actually what has happened now. So there are some cases of the township election, county election, and then we had hope for that. Well, it hasn't happened. It happened in a few cases in some township, some county. We rarely hear that there are the second time township election, third time township election. Instead, actually now, Chinese Communist Party introduces electoral system to elect village party secretary. And the village party secretary, there is no reason to be elected, because that's just the top of the party, right? But now that there are more and more villages introduce election to the village party secretary. So again, this is a good system for the Chinese Communist Party to choose some potentially good governor without seeing the party organization formed. Well, actually, I will stop here, and then I would like to. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I will keep a queue. So please raise your hand, Sam.
Putting this into comparative perspective, you know that there's a large literature on decentralization, subnational autonomy in Africa and Latin America and so forth. It seems to me if you put this on a spectrum, one would probably put this at an extreme of centralization and no subnational autonomy. What there is appears to be more sort of a sham than a reality. I mean, it is interesting to, in the tax side and the fee side, the buying of votes and things like that. But so it sort of on the margins there seems to be a little degree of flexibility going on, but not really anything that challenges the system as a whole. Do you think that's a fair characterization? That it's really not any real decentralization or subnational autonomy going on?
Yes, it is fair description, but actually, you have Thomas. You have a class, so I'll answer his question, and then I'll go back to that point. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so my question is very simple and very maybe complicated at the same time. One of the narratives that I was expecting when I saw this topic was the question that I read about several occasions of the dozens of millions of people who flee the rural areas so as to live in cities, Chinese cities, because they have more opportunities. So I wanted to ask you how this fit in your study. To what extent is this transfer of population impacting the dynamics of tax reform, and to what extent the tax reform in rural China impacts this phenomenon? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So the two things. One, there is the trend that more people who had migrated to the cities from the rural areas are returning to the rural areas, and then that's one reason is of course taxes and fees are abolished, so it's better at least to be a farmer in the rural areas. So that's actually, and then that gives the pressure to raise the wages in the factories in the cities. So that is one thing. However, that trend is restricted because now actually it's in the, another thing that we have to keep in mind is actually now it's the second generation. Okay, so, and then in China there is a household registration system called the Hukou system. And the Hukou system, under the Hukou system, if your parents are coming from the rural areas, then you have a Hukou system, the rural Hukou, the rural household registration, which means you do not have full access to social welfare system and education system. Okay, so what does it mean? Well, you cannot have receive the basic public service, public goods. So you may want to go back to the rural areas. Problem with the second generation is they have never farmed, they have never lived in the rural areas. And then you can easily imagine that it's very difficult to farm if you have never farmed when you grew up, right? So that in that sense, that's why there are a lot of more and more increasing number of suicides in among the workers in urban areas, and then that is the reason. So if those who are in the cities can go back to rural areas, that's actually still a better story. So that's actually those two things.
Thank you.
And then going back to decentralization. So the point is, so in the 1980s, actually, so this is a time that the central government expenditure, central government expenditure goes down, and then while central government revenue is kind of is flattened. So this in 1980s was the real decentralization time. Problem was decentralization is so we will allow you to do whatever you want to do, right? So central government says central government allows local governments more autonomy to do whatever local governments can do. If the locality has economic resources, such as an endowment for rural industry, then that locality would prosper. And then that is the case of many cases. There are many cases like that in the coastal regions, coastal villages. Problem is, even if it is then decentralized and given autonomy, freedom, if your locality does not have economic resources, they cannot do anything. So that's actually it caused because of the decentralization. How should I say? The problem is that because of the decentralization, what was I going to say? Sorry. So because of decentralization, what happens is an intra-rural inequality. So some rural areas are now much richer, other rural areas much poorer. Some rural areas are industrialized, other rural areas are still agriculture oriented, and then those agricultural villages stayed poor. So that's actually a result of the decentralization. The impact of the decentralization, there are a lot of literature, and then Barry Wine just wrote it, and then etc. And theoretically that works, but that is a condition. The basic assumption is that locality has economic resources. And then the series of the fiscal reform in 1994, and then later in 2000. That actually really hurts the agricultural villages that do not have resources, even if they are given autonomy. And at the same time, the later central government noticed that they do not have their revenue. They can claim shrinks. So that's why they did the 1994 fiscal reform, and then so they tried to regain the revenue.
I'm having some trouble thinking through the strategy of the central government in all of this, because my first thought is, in China, the central government is all powerful, and it obviously decides who gets what proportion of the revenues, and it seems to me that it has chosen to keep a lot of the revenue. So my first question is, why bother squeezing the governments at the lower level? Why not be like Saudi Arabia, or I'm from Singapore, and Singapore is going through a general election right now. Pay for the public services. If you've got the money for it, just pay for public services. I mean, why go through this rigmarole of squeezing the local governments and then institutionalizing those electoral institutions and all of that? Yeah, I guess that's basically that question.
Okay. A few ways of answering that question, but the first one, the easiest part, that is, how China is different from Saudi Arabia or Singapore. Number one, China is much bigger than Singapore. Therefore, it's much more difficult for the central government to control the local governments. And so the overall answer is Chinese Communist Party or the Chinese central leadership. The main goal is always the same. That is controlling the society, governing the state, and maintaining authoritarian rule. That is the goal. So all other goals will be contingent to that major goal of maintaining one-party rule. And in order to maintain one-party rule, central government always has to at least control what's going on. Okay, so it's not like the people's welfare or even economic development. Economic development is a tool. If the economy develops, then the people are happy, so they will not demand the democratization. That's actually what central government wants to happen, right? So for that goal, the decrease of the revenue that central government can claim in the 1980s was actually problematic. And then what central government really worries about was the local governments may have more autonomy and then rebel against the central government. So what they worry about is actually the more demand of political freedom comes from the local government. So again, China is big. The Singaporean government does not have to worry about that because they do not have local government, right? In case of difference from Saudi Arabia, the main revenue source is oil, and then oil is controlled by the state sector. China, in order for the central government to have a revenue, economy must develop, manufacturing industry must develop. And you cannot just the state comes in and then you can work for the manufacturing goods and then economy should develop. You cannot do that. If you have oil revenue, and then you can do that. So this is actually the story of how to make sure that the central government has a grip over local government and also local people. And then the central Chinese government has to a grip over the fiscal revenue to control the locality.
Good, I'm like it.
Thank you for the talk. It was really interesting. I had a sort of two-part question. At the beginning of the talk, you mentioned that Xi Jinping is visiting the United States and that as he thinks about the relations with the United States, some of these issues would be in the back of his mind. So I wanted to ask you if you could elaborate a little bit more on how you see the two working together. And the other part is thinking again of the drive that's been going on the last few years by him to stamp out corruption in bureaucracy. I wasn't sure after you explained this section on how it was changed from fee to taxes. Some of the outcomes, I wasn't sure if you were calling them corruption or just creative forms of getting around stuff.
What's the difference?
So I was curious if there's been, if that drive has actually affected some of that.
The shortest answer to the last question you raised is yes. Okay, so how is it related to Xi Jinping's U.S. visit? Well, so two things. One is actually the Xi Jinping, what Chinese government, since 1990s, well actually since 1980s, when Deng Xiaoping started the open up reform. Their way of doing managing the economy and politics is solving the most imminent problem, and then they usually do not have a very long-term strategy. Deng Xiaoping did not start the market-oriented reform with thinking about in 3 decades China would become the second largest economy if China becomes marketized. So it's like the behavior of the Chinese government is what is it called? Like something comes up and you have to smash it.
Whack-a-mole.
Whack-a-mole, yeah. So that's what the Chinese government's behavior for the reform. And then it makes sense. They would say that if you cannot solve the short-term problem, you cannot solve the long-term problem. And China, has a short-term problem one after another always, right? So the central government's revenue decreased. Okay. 1994 fiscal reform. Let's allow central government. Let's have central government claim more revenue. People are angry with the fees. Okay, let's abolish the fees. Okay. As a result, so where is the fiscal resources for the local government in agricultural villages? Well, we will think about it later, probably, right? By the way, if the central government, it's not true that central government did nothing to the local fiscal crisis. Actually, basically they increased the fiscal transfer to the local government. Problem is, given the situation what I described, if the central government starts dropping some money from the top, when it reaches the township government, money has already gone somewhere. So the problem is, so that's the fiscal transfer. Like, theoretically, actually, central government prepared for more amount of the fiscal transfer than the amount that is lost by abolition of agricultural taxes. So theoretically it works, but result was money when money was gone somewhere. So that's one. So the one thing. So the Xi Jinping's basically like the behavior is kind of whack-a-mole. Okay, so it's not different from the previous administration. Second thing is actually Elizabeth Economy, Council of Foreign Relations, wrote an excellent article in Foreign Affairs, and she said basically the Xi Jinping's behavior, the principle of behavior is grip. So grip over anything. So and it makes sense. So what he tries to do is grip over the domestic politics, society, right? Problem is, according to her, and which I agree with, that is, Xi Jinping also tries to apply that kind of principle to the international affairs. Meaning, what he tries to do is grip over international order. And then that's actually more difficult, at least, right? If not impossible. So combining those two, one example I can think of is that China has established BRICS Bank, which is also a new development bank, and then now AIIB, and then a new Silk Road Initiative, or called the One Belt One Road Initiative. If you have a kind of long-term strategy, you don't need 3 institutions. But why Xi Jinping does that? Well, maybe like a new development bank, maybe a good idea. AIIB, maybe a good idea. New Silk Road Initiative, maybe a good idea. He basically tries to do everything. That may be helpful to make the grip firmer. So one implication, which I usually suggest on the foreign policy toward China is don't assume that China has some long-term strategy when China does something. If you assume that China has some long-term strategy when China doesn't have a long-term strategy, it will lead to kind of suspicion, and an unnecessary suspicion, I would say. So that's actually the relationship with the implication of today's talk on Xi Jinping's visit. And then one more thing actually I had to add is one message is Xi Jinping is primarily concerned with domestic instability. And then what we are usually asking is whether China is a responsible player or responsible stakeholder in the international politics. It's difficult for a country whose leader is primarily concerned with domestic instability to be responsible for international affairs, which is not necessarily directly related to their direct national interests. So they may be interested in Africa because they need oil, but they are not interested. It's more difficult for China to be really interested in other issues, like a human rights issue or development even in African countries. So that's actually another implication. Anti-corruption campaign, that's a very interesting point. So what I try to show here is, well, every government has some problem, right? So and as you said, it's kind of like what is corruption, what is not corruption? Well, some say that as long as it's illegal, that is corruption, and if it is legal, it's not corruption. Okay, so what is legal and what is illegal, and that's also not clear. So now Xi Jinping is doing an anti-corruption campaign, which sounds like a good idea, right? Anti-corruption. Problem is, if Xi Jinping really strictly implements it, and then I think he is strictly implementing, and then that's not a bad idea per se, but if he does that, problem is every local official would say, wait a minute, maybe like the next one to be purged would be myself, right? Because I know a few years ago, yes, that we used that amount of money for this kind of thing, that kind of thing, right? Because we have to, right? Not necessarily that person is a bad person or a really corrupt individually. So then what would you do if you are in that situation? You do nothing, and that's better to do nothing, right? Well, China needs to keep doing the reform because it's still a developing country, and then Xi Jinping has done, well, in general, actually, it's fair to say that he has a very good idea for the reform. His reform plan is really good, and then it would work if local officials implement them. And so again, China is big. So unless local government implements them, the reform plan will not be realized. And then the local officials now are all afraid of maybe the next one to be punished would be myself. So it made actually reform plan. So anti-corruption campaign makes reform plan not working. So that's actually the dilemma that Xi Jinping is facing.
I wondered what effect the tottering economy in China would have on the rural areas, and whether the influx of the yuan into the stock market is affecting what reserves they have, so that too would affect what they can actually do for the rural economy.
The rural economy that is hit by the recent stock market crash and the various economic problems is industrialized rural areas. So those who are rich enough to invest in the stock market because that area has a rural industry. Quite successful. And then the rural industry, by the way, is different from what you may imagine in the kind of the small farm factory. But actually, they are exporting the products to the foreign country, and you may wear something that is made in those rural factory. Then they actually they're looking for the place to invest their money. And then stock market was actually really encouraged, or was attractive place, and then central government really encouraged them to invest in the stock market. Because the high stock price is good news for central government. So they invested. However, actually they are not explained on the risk of the stock market. Actually, it's fascinating if you look at the kind of advertisement that the central government or the CCTV, so the state TV station, is saying in the TV, that's fascinating. That's just saying how good investing in the stock market is, and then the interest that you will receive as a result of the investment in the stock market is much higher than the interest rate when you deposit that money in the bank. And then that's usually true. However, it is like that simply because you may lose money in the stock market, and much more likely than the case you just deposit the money in the bank. But they do not explain that risk. So many people have invested money as a result of the rural industrialization in the stock market, and then without knowing the risk of the investment in the stock market. So they will be influenced most. So that's actually the one thing that the current problem, actually, the major actor that is involved in the current problem is actually local financial institutions.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's actually a very big problem.
Thank you.
Professor Takeuchi, so in the reform era, there's been a lot of factors that have sort of marginalized the rural areas. Would you say that, and obviously, I think other than saying China is big, we often will hear a lot of scholars say that China's in transition. So, when the original 1978 reforms hit, it was a slow process, but, we can say that a lot of problems were created and a lot of people were, brought out of poverty at the same time. So with the tax reforms, I guess my simple question is, has it improved people's lives at all in rural areas, or has it made their lives worse?
Your last point is the answer is it improved the people's lives in the rural areas.
That seems like what we care about here the most, right? In a sense, is like whether it's actually improving people's lives.
Yes. Okay. The answer is yes. But one thing that you can say is you could have improved people's lives in a different way, and then if that is the case, people's lives would have been improved in a better way. So still agricultural areas are poor. Still people who migrated from the rural areas to urban areas are struggling. Although their income in the cities is much higher than where the income that they could reach by farming in the rural areas, right? But there is no reason why they shouldn't receive the kind of public goods, basic public goods provision, social welfare services, compulsory education in urban areas. And then eventually, one big problem is as a result of whack-a-mole strategy. As a result of whack-a-mole strategy. I don't think this is the central government really planned, but now the local government is really dysfunctioning, and so because they do not have a capability of providing public goods, and if local governments do not function and then do not implement the policies, do not provide public goods, I don't think China's economic development is sustainable. So while the central government has done the reform in a way that will not lead to long-term sustainable economic development, well, the reason is simple. They didn't have a kind of long-term strategy. They didn't plan in that way, but by solving the short-term problems, this is where we are. So it's true that China has solved a lot of the problems, but at the same time, it created a lot of new problems. And then here is the kind of point that often we talk about what is better, why is the democracy better than authoritarianism? Well, under the authoritarianism, central government can really put all the responsibilities, all the burdens to the local governments, and then that's what actually central government has done. And so that worked for us to a short term to strengthen the legitimacy of the central government. But if local government is really undermined, then it will have, in the long term actually, it will have a negative impact on the economy. So that's actually the big picture that I'm trying to show here.
My question is not directly related in your research, but since you're a Chinese specialist, I want to hear about your opinion. These days, people, especially who's interested in business, when we talk about China, we talk about Marvin all the time.
You talk about what?
Marvin, the president and CEO of Alibaba.
Oh, Marvin.
So he's obviously not a guacamole type of person who thought about the Chinese future in next 30 years long ago. And he's also self-made man, and I think he's changing the China's, influencing China's young people and the entrepreneurship environment in China too. So I just wanted to see what you think about his influence in China, and if any, what is that going to change China's the environment, especially in the rural areas? Since you talked about the Chinese people from second generation coming from the rural area, going to the big cities and have frustrated life there and suicide rate and all those problems. But he's one of the person who's from the rural area too, right? So I just wanted to hear about your opinion on that.
Okay, so the last part of what you said is that really the problem is the people who grew up in urban areas, whose parents are from the rural areas, but who never have been to rural areas. So in that case, the people who are from the rural areas themselves are much better condition. Okay. Your overall question is actually touching upon another aspect of the problem in China's political economy right now. That is very roughly saying that in China, among the so-called entrepreneurs or enterprise managers, there are two types of enterprise managers. One is the private entrepreneurs. So they are innovative. They know how to do business under the market economy. Therefore, they are successful. That's actually one kind of the success story in China's economy. The other story is sort of state capitalism and the state capitalists. So that they used to be usually the state-owned enterprise manager. They used to be government officials, and then they become entrepreneurs or nominally private entrepreneur, and then they are quite successful. But they are successful not because they know how to manage the company under the market economy, but because they have a good political connection. Actually, Alibaba's Mr. Ma's case is actually both. And then actually, he is entrepreneur, real entrepreneur, I agree. At the same time, he's also very good at managing political connection. And so in that's why he is extremely successful, because he can do both. But when you look at the various stories about China's entrepreneurs and then also the discussion about China's state capitalism, if you keep in mind that there are two types of the business people in China right now, among those successful business people. One is the real private entrepreneur, and the other is state capitalist.
I think that prerogative, it's a fascinating story you're telling. Right? That essentially the central government is involved in a massive program of blame shifting
Yes. That's great. That's a great summary. Yeah, thank you.
You can use that for the next book.
Actually, I wrote something similar, but okay, then later, yeah.
I got it. No, but this is what's going on. It's a massive program of blame shifting. They've concocted, as you say, in an ad hoc way, this system of forcing local officials to meet certain standards every single year, and then denying them revenues to do it, but then giving them incentives to get elected by buying votes, which directs everybody's attention on them, right? Your talk suggests that this can't last forever. This might not be durable forever. Why not? Right? What would I mean? China's been playing this game for a long time. They've been blame shifting internally and externally. If things go bad, they channel nationalism towards Japan, or towards Taiwan, or towards the Philippines, or Vietnam. Right? When things go bad internally, they deflect blame inward towards these poor, hapless, corrupt local officials. I'll use the word corrupt. Right? It is corrupt. What would a better way of putting this is not whether it could last forever, but what would cause rural opinion to shift towards the center? What would be this thing that said, okay, I guess the gig is up. I'm not going to blame my local village chief or my local party official. I'm going to blame Beijing. What would cause popular opinion to change?
Okay, that's a very fascinating point, and I think that Josh assumes that my second thought is starting now.
Is that book 2?
So actually, you are so your question is similar to the question raised by Jim Holyfield when I gave a job talk here several years ago when in the same room, and he asked me you say that it's not sustainable, and then so actually, he actually really questioned is it really unsustainable, that kind of question, and then why has it been successful, or has it been working? So let me answer your question in the following way. So that is telling you first the kind of optimistic scenario that may happen. So, if you're a township official or a county official, you are blamed by the central government, you are blamed by the people. Do you want to be a county official or township official? Well, the answer is no. And then, but actually, I benefit from it, by the way, because they don't care if they are fired or anything or demoted. So that's why they tell me that okay, so for, this is an official account, and then this is what is in the reality. And it's much more difficult when I did an interview in the successful local government and in rural areas that has a lot of the factories and then a lot of the economic resources. That's actually the place where my interview was very difficult because they do not want to lose their job. Point is, so the village election started in the 1980 in one village in Guangxi province, and because nobody wanted to be village official. And then, so at that time, village official was only you have to be a Communist Party member. So no Communist Party member wanted to be a village chief. Therefore, they were creative. So they said, let's vote for somebody. Let's decide the village chief by voting. And then, villagers wrote the name that they want to be a village chief, and then a certain person was elected. It's not the central government introduced the village election, and then that was spread. And apparently, very few people wanted to be a village chief in various places. So, and then in 1987, what the central government said was, it seems that's a good idea, so why don't you do that? We approve it. And that's 1987. And then in 1997, they said, well, actually, you must do it. Okay, so that's every village has to have a village election. Now, what's going on is the township and county officials. So many people say we do not want to be official. We want to be a chief of the county, this county or that the township. There is a slight possibility that they may start saying, let's introduce the election to the township level or county level in that sense. And then there is a possibility that that is spread, and then that's if the election is introduced in township or county level, it's not an election where candidates know every voter. So some organization is created, and then it's like a Chinese Communist Party candidate versus opposition party candidate, and then it might become the real democratic election, and then so the rural governance might be the really democratic. So that's actually one most optimistic scenario to solve the problem of the rural governance. So going back to your question of what may change the people's view about the central government, in a sense, it has already been shifted. So Chinese farmers know that this problem is actually eventually caused by the central government, because, well, so the survey research shows that the villagers actually primarily blame local officials, and then the lower, the less popular. So the least popular officials are township, and then the next is county, and then municipal, provincial, and central government is most popular. And then, but at the same time, in that sense, central government's the blame game is successful in right now. But actually, the Chinese villagers are aware that the ones who they are blaming were appointed by the higher authority who are more popular. So that's actually in terms of the popularity, the shift actually has already started. And then does it lead to a more a democratic rural governance? That's actually a different issue, but there is a possible scenario. And then that's actually very difficult to answer that question.
But I mean, if I understand your answer, the change is going to come when local individuals start weighing off the benefits of corruption versus the cost of being the target of all this abuse, and they decide that the benefits of corruption really aren't that great anymore, and they really don't want to be the targets of all that abuse. And if they stop putting themselves out there for local office, then you have an upward pressure towards higher elections, which makes it harder for the CCP to insulate itself.
Yeah, so actually, I'm not sure where is the tipping point, but at the same time, here is kind of contradiction in the rural governance of China, but not just rural governance, but also governance in general in China. So Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s, early 1980s, started the market-oriented reform, not for democratization, but for maintaining one-party rule. And he thinks that market system is better for economic development, and economic development is necessary for maintaining one-party rule. So economic growth is still one pillar of the legitimacy. But at the same time, since the 1990s, after Tiananmen incident in 1989, Chinese Communist Party worries about the market-oriented reform will lead to the demand of the democratization. So what they did was introducing a lot of the former officials, former state-owned enterprise managers. They could be the entrepreneurs, and then they can distribute the vested interest to those people. So it's a corruption or collusion, but that is actually the other pillar of the maintaining one-party rule. Problem is, these two are can be contradictory. one pillar may undermine the other pillar. And that's what Xi Jinping is, the contradiction that Xi Jinping is facing. Does he have a solution? I don't think so. And then an anti-corruption campaign. That's a typical good example. The one pillar influences the other pillar. But he still is thinking about what to do. And I'm often asked the question of what would be the solution for this contradiction. My answer is, if I know that, then I would have already been invited by Beijing. So the sustainability is always tricky because so far it's working. It's easy to say it's not sustainable for a long time. How long will it be sustained? I don't know.
Well, those are all topics for your third book, which we look forward to. Please join me in thanking our speaker. And take a cookie. Keep away from me.